Welcome back to another Provident webinar. I'm your host, Ed Mann, Director of Training and Education for Provident. Tonight, I'm reintroducing Chris Pfaff for the third time as part of his Hazardous Materials series. Tonight, Chris will present Firefighter Toxicology. I'm coming to you live from a motel in Tucson, Arizona. I'm attending a workshop with the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation. So Chris has become a regular for our podcast and webinar series, primarily because of his passion for the subjects and his desire to educate first responders and keep them safe. In case you missed it, we hosted a webinar with Bruce Borghi from Lexipol on September the 27th, and the topic was failure to lead. You can view this and all of the others that we've hosted on our Provident YouTube page. We'll make sure we provide a link to the past webinars and a follow-up email you'll receive after tonight. Please make sure to also check out and subscribe to our station 1902. We'll be posting the podcast we recorded with Dr. Rich Gassaway on Situational Awareness Matters no later than November the 1st. We'll provide more information on how you can subscribe in our follow-up email. So as we typically do at the beginning of any of our Provident webinars, I want to go through some slides. So Provident obviously is an insurance company that started out as an independent agency in 1902 in Pittsburgh. In 1928, they began serving volunteer fire departments with a customized blanket and accident health policy. In many places, it's known as fireman's relief policies. Today, we provide volunteer combination and career firefighters and emergency medical responders with a multitude of programs. We also offer special risk and transportation insurance programs. Provident, for the 6th consecutive year, was voted by the Insurance Business of America as a top insurance employer. Some of the programs that we offer, emergency services programs, are accident and health insurance. If you're an accident and health client of ours, you and your dependents are entitled to use our free first responder assistance program. We also offer a 24-hour accidental and dismemberment policy that actually covers your firefighters for accidental death when they're off duty. We have a group term life policy that we can offer to you and your firefighters, a critical illness and cancer policy that actually pays a living benefit if you're diagnosed with cancer, you have a heart attack, a stroke, or renal failure, and of course, our Fire Plus property and casualty insurance, where we insure things rather than people. And if you're a property and casualty client, your members are entitled free access to our Fire Plus Academy, which is actually hosted through Fire Rescue One, or what is better known today as Lexipol. So tonight, without further ado, I have the opportunity. Well, wait, before I go on, a couple of housekeeping notes or rules of engagement. Within the next day or two, we'll provide you with all of Chris's slides, as well as a link to watch this recording on our YouTube page. However, to receive your certificate of attendance, you must be present for the entirety of this live webinar. Due to the number of people participating tonight, we may not get to your question. We're going to try to capture any questions we don't get to tonight and get you answers in the next few days. If you don't have an answer by Friday, November the 3rd, please don't hesitate to contact me at eman@provident.ins and we'll get them answered. For those departments hosting this live webinar for their entire department, please send us a spreadsheet with the first name, last name, and email address, and we'll get certificates sent to them. But please, I need to emphasize, make sure we have the correct first name, last name, and the email address. So Chris, without further ado, please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you very much, Chief. Let's make sure I get everything all set up here. Hopefully I got that going on. So guys, it is so cool to see all of this and see all the names. I can absolutely say without a doubt that I was super excited with seeing how many names there were out there for the lithium-ion battery class when we did that. Let me come on. But I'm seeing groups and members from Canada, from Washington State, from Pennsylvania, from Puerto Rico. It was kind of cool when I saw one of the members from Washington State. They're like, you're like 45 minutes from my house. It's so awesome. The PHRT international headquarters. But for the big thing right here, the great thing about this is that the international association that we have from the United States, from Canada, from Puerto Rico, from all of these different areas, and we're all here to learn. And I think that's the biggest thing that we're all about here. So let's get into it here. And there's some of my basic information, and you guys can check out some of the other stuff there. And I'm gonna give my introduction here, like Chief introduced and talked about. Once again, my name is Chris Pfaff, and I work with West Pierce Fire and Rescue as my host agency. I'm the owner and lead instructor for hazmatandrescue.com. So I ended up seeing the need out there for some hazmat instruction, not only in the Northwest, but across the nation, across the world. And we've created ongoing, online, simple hazmat lessons that you can get straight from your own digital device. 5 to 15 minutes, simple micro lessons that'll get everything taken care of. And within a year, you'll have 8 hours of training. We've built that out for awareness, which will always be free, by the way, operations in a more professional setting. And then now we're working into technician, and I'm working with some members down in Florida to build up some hazmat incident command gamification, if you will. We're looking at building up a board game. But beyond that, I've been adding more and more things. I identified over the last few years that we forget our air monitor reading. So I have a little air monitor chart that you can tag onto your air monitor, which will give the low and high readings. It'll give correlation numbers, other things like that, and training videos. We're working on building waterproof ERGs, emergency response guidebooks, in the hazmat world. So when we end up going out to do training, I'm from the Northwest. It's always raining out here. So our books just get destroyed. So hey, why not make them waterproof? Outstanding. We're working on that, hopefully for next year, for the newest edition of the ERG that will be out there. So we do a lot of things at Hazmat and Rescue, and you can check us out on all the social medias. If you check out Hazmat and Rescue for Twitter, we end up sharing any and all training for firefighting, tech rescue, and hazmat and EMS. Anything that I see, I share it. So if you have an organization that likes to provide online and in-person training, hit me up over on Twitter, and we can end up sharing that information. We post up our basic information on Facebook for any of the classes that we end up doing. We were down in Houston Hot Zone just a week and a half ago talking about lithium-ion batteries, fire investigation. We were talking about carbon dioxide emergencies. And we'll be back down in Texas in January talking about lithium-ion batteries as a whole. I'll be working with Captain Chris Green of Seattle Fire probably in, let's think, I think March of next year down in Midwest City, Oklahoma. So there's a lot of different places across country that we travel to and provide instruction, and we can always provide ongoing instruction for that. And then if you want just a quick 60-minute burst or 60-second burst of hazardous materials training, go check out Instagram, where we end up doing hazmat minutes. Monday through Thursday, we do a 60-second little quick video just talking about some of the great ongoing hazmat training. And then on Friday, we get out there and we do Freelance Friday Talk for a whole minute and a half and get into that. But you can see right there, I've been in the fire service for a while. I'm now in the prevention field, and there's a lot of learning that has to happen there. But I still run on a rig. On Saturday, I ran a 24-hour shift with our guys. We had a pretty fun, busy day. Tried to help as many people out. But I've been working a lot with air monitors, helping out with the FEMA Washington Task Force 1. I'm still wearing my dungarees because I was out there training them on enhanced operations in the contaminated environment today. So we got some of our members schooled up with that. And I teach a lot of our academies within my jurisdiction as well as across Washington State. As you can see, probably with my background, I am in a hotel room. Just like Chief is, he's over in Tucson, we're down here. I'm just north of Seattle right now in a hotel room because tomorrow I'll be teaching another fire department up here for hazmat awareness and hazmat op. Oh, my good buddy Greg is in here. I love it. I love it. Good stuff. So let's take a look at what we're talking about here. Toxicology. So I'm not a paramedic, and I'm guessing everybody in here is not all hazmat technicians. So we're not going to go down this huge hazmat path, and we're not going to go down the Caduceus route with paramedicine and trying to identify what your protocols are for toxicology and how to take care of things and how to work things out. We're going to talk about this in a basic firefighting sense. It's as simple as that. All we're trying to do is understand how to protect ourselves from the hazards on the fireground, the hazards in car accidents, the hazards on EMS calls, on our overdoses, other items like that. So we're just going to have a basic context about what our PPE can do and how it can help us. I think my PPE is actually my computer bag. I'll grab it here in a second when we get to that point. But it's important just to understand some of those basic concepts and how to protect ourselves. So let's take a look here. How will this material get me? Depends on what state of matter it is. Of course, our three most common states of matter out there are solid, liquid, and gas. What are those properties and how those work out? We're going to talk a little bit about physical properties and make us just a reminder on how this stuff works out. And then what are our routes of entry? Because my PPE is going to be driven by what that route of entry is. So a quick reminder, we have our three states of matter. I think we all know what these are. We have solid, liquid, and gas. The most dangerous and the one that's going to travel out the furthest is the gas, right? It travels and it fills an area indefinitely. The liquids are also hazardous because they can flow with gravity and they also produce vapors as well. If you've ever been to the gas pump at a gas station, you probably recognize that. And then solids are our least dangerous, most stable. However, think about it in the EMS calls when we take a look at it. We're going to talk about things like fentanyl and carfentanil and how those hazards can present and how we can protect ourselves. So let's take a look at our solids here on the toxicology level. Once again, they're the least mobile. We have the inhalation hazard. We start thinking about aerosolized dust, other things like that. Way back in the day, we all remember about September 11, 2001, tragic day across the entire United States, shifted everything that we know across the world when it comes on down to response, safety, and security. However, a month later, we started seeing anthrax emergencies, anthrax letters getting sent out to news organizations, to the president, to congressmen's offices, and there was a huge scare on that. And across the entire nation, we had departments and agencies responding everywhere to white powder calls. So that was a solid hazard. And that solid is one of those big things that we have to worry about and focus on when we take a look at this. So it can get aerosolized, and we have very, very small dust, and you start thinking about these particulates, they can get deep down into our lungs. And of course, once they get deep down into our lungs, into the alveoli, that solid and that powder can now be in my bloodstream. So there is that hazard when we're looking at solids. So we have the inhalation. We also have a skin contact hazard as well. So my outer layer of skin is absolutely an amazing protective feature for me when we take a look at this. If I have any broken skin, obviously the solid can get in there, but we have absorption as well. Most solids, for the most part, not always, never in the world of hazmat or toxicology, aren't going to be able to break through the skin. But if I get a surfactant, like water or alcohol, rubbing alcohol when we end up wiping our hands, or washing my hands, or if my skin's wet because of sweat or because of rain or anything else like that, now that solid can get put into that liquid solution and it absolutely can absorb into our skin. When I sit there and I start talking about foam and other things like that, I remind everybody, when you sit in that bathtub and you're playing with that little tugboat and the rubber duckies and everything else like that for 5, 10, 15 minutes, okay, an hour and a half, and then you get out of the shower, the hot tub, wherever it is, your skin is dried out and your fingers are all wrinkly. Why is your skin dried out after being soaked with water for so long? Well, it's because it's a polar solvent. The water on the outside is literally leaching out and pulling water on the inside. Likewise, some of those materials can get into our bloodstream through that absorption process as a solid that gets put into a solution. Other hazards that can come from our solids that are not really toxicology are entrapment, like a confined space emergency, like my dude hanging out in the corner right here. The flammability hazard, dust hazards. I think it was in Baltimore just a few years ago, a sugar facility. I think every like 3 years, the Domino sugar plant catches on fire and has an explosion. In Pennsylvania earlier this year, they had a dust-borne explosion with multiple fatalities. Once again, not toxicology, but one of those things we want to be aware of is that our small dusts, that surface to mass ratio, they can become an explosive hazard. And then we also have radiation hazards from my solids as well. Most of my radioactives are in the solid state. So to protect myself, I need to make sure it doesn't go into my body. That's going to be the route of inhalation. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. The liquids. Liquids are probably the most common hazardous material out there, and they're the most common toxic issue that you may end up experiencing on a car accident or a hazmat scene. Solids are going to be for my EMS calls, liquids for auto accidents, other items like that. Gasoline, diesel, antifreeze, battery acid, other items like that. And of course, any type of the hazmat haulers that are out there. Here's what I want you to truly understand and recognize when it comes on down to liquids. All liquids, not always never, all liquids will produce vapors. Water is always producing vapor. Gasoline is always producing vapor. Diesel is always producing vapor. Yes, even mercury as a liquid is always producing vapor. What this means for us is if we have a liquid out, and you think about it that way, once again, go back to that gas station that I talked about. If you go outside and you smell that chemical, that means you're being exposed to it. That means that we are going to continue, we're going to start facing toxic effects of it. We may not end up getting that critical body burden that we're going to talk about, but we still are being impacted by that chemical if you start smelling it. So my liquids will always produce vapors. More importantly, those vapors will always go down. And we're going to talk about that with vapor density here in a second or two, but it's important to understand that my vapors, other than water, water is the one exemption to this. Water is actually light. You can recognize that if you look up in the sky, because there's clouds, and clouds are made of water. Water is lighter than air. Water vapor is lighter than air. Every other vapor that we have out there, mercury vapor, diesel vapor, gasoline, toluene, any type of liquid, its vapors are heavier than air. Therefore, those vapors are going to go down into storm drains, into sewers, or if it's upstairs, if it's on the second floor from you. We ended up having my neighbors up here in Washington. They responded on an emergency, unknown issue. The occupants were smelling some odd smells, and the power company, or at least the natural gas company, they went in with their special sniffer monitors. And that natural gas guy, thinking it was a natural gas call, it was not. He started getting lightheaded. He started getting dizzy. He started experiencing symptoms of hypoxia. And after talking to him, talking to the hazmat team of our neighboring agency, we identified that the HVAC system in one of the closets on the third floor had a leak of refrigerant. And that refrigerant, although not a highly toxic material, was displacing the oxygen in the stairwell as it was coming on down. And my counterpart, the worker at the gas company, as he was walking up the stairs, he was walking through a cloud of oxygen deficient environment. So it wasn't toxicology, but it's just important for us to recognize where our products are going to be going. All right, gases. Oh, I'm sorry, not gas. We already talked about gases, but it is important to understand that these vapors come out of these liquids, and they do produce, the liquids produce these vapors. Temperature and pressure are equally joined at the hip. We've had a cold snap down here, up here in Washington State. It was 27 degrees as I left for work this morning. Most of my liquids are going to be producing very, very small amounts of vapors. But if we get on down to Arizona, where Chief Man is, if we get into the blazing sunlight, you're going to start seeing elevated temperatures, going to have higher vapor production. I think we all recognize that, but it's just important for us to just be reminded that higher temperatures equal higher vapor production. Higher potential for toxicology means we need more protection for this. Where is it going? We just talked about that, where those vapors go. The vapors from the liquids go down, but our gases, most of my gases also go down. 4-H Medicana is an acronym that we have out there, but you know what? All I care about is that the product goes down. I have a few items, and I'll give you another acronym. There's some of our older members, they may remember hahamycin. Some of our newer members may remember 4-H Medicana. I'm going to give you a third one because it's shorter and it's more simple. Because for anybody in there, do you remember what 4-H Medicana stands for? Or do you remember what hahamycin stands for? hydrogen fluoride, hydrogen something, another hydrogen, maybe there's a lot of them, right? And you got 13 gases, and it's tough unless you're like a hazmat geek. It's really tough to remember beyond that acronym of what ha-ha-mycin is or 4-H medic Anna is. So when we sit there and take a look at it, I like ha-ha, and when we're taking a look at ha-ha, it's just 6 gases, because I have all these different gases that are lighter than air. We have methane. They ended up adding illuminating gases, which is methane. I have helium. I don't go in a lot of helium emergencies. I already know that helium is lighter than air because I've played with balloons as a kid. So I don't need that to memorize that in an acronym. I do need to memorize and remember that hydrogen itself is lighter than air. But once again, we know that because the Hindenburg, right? Hydrogen fluoride, one of those gases that are coming from our electric vehicles. That's lighter than air. Hydrogen cyanide, part of the toxic twins from our structure fires, that has an IDLH of 50 parts per million. That's lighter than air. Acetylene, highly flammable gas, that's lighter than air. That's important to know. Obviously, methane, as we see right here, is lighter than air as well. So those are the big ones, and the last most important one is ammonia. The rest of the gases, diborane, there's just, they're industrial chemicals. So the biggest thing I want you to remember from this is not memorizing acronyms, not memorizing exactly what chemical is lighter than air. Just recognize that there's only 13 of them, and there's only 6 common ones. Therefore, all of the other ones, they go down. And as you look at this slide, I think it puts it perfectly in the context that I got from Mother Ipsa here, the good old Essentials for Firefighting 7th edition. I'm guessing they're going to have exactly the same for Firefighting Essentials 8th edition. We have hot air balloons here in the picture. How do hot air balloons work? How does a hot air balloon work? I don't know if I saw anybody from New Mexico, but you guys are all about, I do say we got New Mexico right there. So they always have the balloon events happening down in Albuquerque every year. Okay, I understand. Everybody's probably sitting there like, they work off of hot air. And that's important to understand and recognize, because hotter air is less dense. Colder air is more dense, right? So when we sit there and identify this, if I go back to this, if I have hot chlorine, it might go up. If I have cold methane, it might go down. So it's important just to recognize that temperature of the product, not temperature of our environment, temperature of the product. Anhydrous ammonia is one of those perfect examples in the toxicological aspect of this. Anhydrous ammonia is lighter than air. It's got a vapor density or relative gas density of 0.6. So the way I put it together is I've got a 60-pound kid on this side of the seesaw, and then I've got the fifth grader that's 100 pounds. Normal air, 100 pounds. 60-pounder, put them on the seesaw, it's going up. All right. That's the way I try to think about specific gravity and vapor density. So 60, 100, going up. But anhydrous ammonia, when it comes out of a container, it's very cold. Its boiling point's negative 29 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's going to be colder than the normal atmosphere. So even though it's lighter than air, it's colder, therefore it's more dense, therefore it stays down. And that's going to really affect things when we start taking a look at toxicology for large scale events, right? All right, persistence. These are a lot for my liquids. I was talking with our FEMA team with the antidote kits, previously known as the Mark I kit. Now they're called duodotes. And this is for nerve agent poison. So we have our nerve agents, which are convulsants. We're going to talk about that here in a second. And there's an acronym to identify this stuff. It's called SLUDGEM: salivation, lacrimation, urination, defecation, MSGI upset, and meiosis. With this, the products are very persistent. So it gets into your body, it's persistent, and it lasts for a long time. If a product lasts in an environment for more than 24 hours, it's considered persistent. So VX gas, one of the third generation agents of nerve agents, it can be persistent and last in an environment for up to 24 hours, 48, and 3 or 4 days it starts degrading and it no longer has efficacy in the toxic levels that they take a look at. But the 4th generation Novichok Russian nerve agents that are out there, they have a persistence of up to, estimated right now, 48 years. There are products and there's items and there's contamination over in England at a site where they don't know where the potential nerve agents are. But if somebody touches it, they can end up having those symptoms. So persistence is important for us because, and that's on the extreme scale, right? I don't expect a lot of my chemicals to have a 48-year persistence. But when you look at things like an EMS call with fentanyl poisoning and carfentanil and other things like that, those solids are persistent in the environment. My liquids can be persistent in the environment. My gases, however, right? When you look at gases, they are the most mobile and they're most dangerous. However, they go away the quickest. So they have zero or low persistence. And that is one of the benefits to them in multiple fields as they take a look at that, good, bad, and otherwise. So when we're dealing with our toxicology here, the gases, they're difficult because they can harm us very, very rapidly. But the solids and the liquids that have this persistence, they can be very dangerous because a day, 2 days, 3 days later, it can cause an issue for us. But I've got my sniffer here, and that's going to protect me. Well, we got to be careful with that. Appearance and odor can help us, and it can give us a clue. I would be lying if I said that I've never been on an odor investigation on a fire engine, and I didn't start rolling down the window. Yep, that smells like a trash fire to me. Or, yep, that smells like natural gas. I'm using my sniffer. I'm using my nose. I'm using it as a qualification tool. Yes or no. Is the product there or is it not there? But I do not want to use it as a quantification tool. See, I was really, really stoked. I ended up bringing my air monitors with me. Well, I brought one of my air monitors with me and I left it in my truck, which is in the basement right now. So unfortunately, I can't show my air monitor that I did, the same air monitor from the air monitor class that we did earlier this year. I think it was this year. And then I ran over my other air monitor this morning because it dropped it and I didn't notice that I dropped it. So now I got to do a little bit of repairs. At least it's still turned on. But we're going to use our air monitors. I do not recommend running over air monitors with your pickup truck, by the way. And there's going to be a lot of repairs that I have to do on that one when I get home. We use our air monitors for quantification. You use your sniffer for qualification. We want to be very careful. We're not going to say the hot zone and cold zone are where I smell it and where I don't smell it. One of the big reasons for this is because some of my very highly toxic products are either they don't produce an odor, or their odor threshold is higher than what its toxic value is. So we have to use quantification tools. We can also become desensitized to the smell. One of the stories comes out with hydrogen sulfide. That's one of the gases that we sense with our air monitor. It's known as sewer gas. So you'll see it in low-lying areas because it's much heavier than air. It's produced from decaying organic matter, like leaves, or more importantly, poopy. Like our sewer systems are loaded with hydrogen sulfide because it comes from the sewers. It's getting consumed from the biological materials and the bacteria that are in there. But the problem with it, the hydrogen sulfide, the sulfur smell, the rotten egg smell, you become desensitized to it. Let's put it more importantly into a more firefighter sense. Like I said, this isn't a hazmat class. It's a firefighter class. You have been on the EMS call with the dude that smells like absolute BO and other illicit items. I will never forget the smell of BO and other illicit items because at least every 3 patients within my jurisdiction have their house just reeking like that. Or the heavy smokers, and they smoke inside their house, and you walk on in and the windows or the walls are just completely brown from all the tar, and the person's perfectly fine. They don't recognize it because they've been desensitized. I always love the Febreze commercial where they have like the massive sock right next to you and that person became nose blind, right? Yes, our toxic chemicals are going to desensitize our sniffers from this, but my gosh, it's just human. It's just the human psychology. You just get used to the smell. You probably even notice it yourself after you go work out, or if you're having a busy day outside, you come back inside, you may have been pouring sweat. You don't think you smell that bad. And then you go home to the family. And like for me, my wife's like, you need to get in the shower right now. Simple as that. You know, we become nose blind to it, right? So we need to be aware of this, right? And then, like I said, a lot of these chemicals are odorless. Propane and methane, they do not have a smell to them. Like we add ethyl and methyl mercaptan respectively to these chemicals because it does give us that rotten egg smell a little bit. It gives us that natural gas, that propane smell. True propane, true natural gas, those are odorless and colorless. And there's a lot of other toxic chemicals out there that are odorless and colorless, which we're going to talk about right now. Absolutely, Jason. I see that right there. Many people in the industry do become nose blind, especially when you're working every day. My brother is a garbage man. He doesn't notice the smell of garbage, right? And that's just garbage. In that industry, absolutely. Those guys just become desensitized to it. So in our hazmat classes, we talk about the acronym TRACEM. Some of you guys, some of our more salty senior members, they may have heard the acronym TEAM CPR. This is all the same. It's just newer acronyms versus older acronyms. I think somebody wanted to get promoted and change the acronym around. And that's all right. I like both acronyms, whatever one works for you. But Mother IFSTA, the curriculum that I typically go off of, they use this acronym right now. Let's see here. So we have thermal, radiological, asphyxiants, chemical, which includes corrosives and different poisons, etiologic materials, and mechanical. And there's also the psychological harm that can happen from a traumatic call, or even more importantly, when you have 6 patients outside a building, and then the people outside are looking at those medic units taking care of those people. Like, I think I'm feeling bad as well, right? So we have to watch out for that in the potential for victims who are not victims, or just that psychological stress. So thermal is hot or cold, right? It's anything beyond our capabilities on that physical threat. That's not toxicology. The radiological is toxicology, however, and that's what I truly want to talk about is the radiation and the acute versus chronic toxicity. So for all my chemicals, for corrosives, for my asphyxiants, for my radiologicals, for all of them, I can take a look at the term for acute versus chronic. So you see right there, most of our events for acute, they're going to be adverse effects within 14 days of the substance exposure to that substance. And not always, never, with proper mitigations, we should be able to cure that person if it's a low enough effect, if it's an acute hazard. Now, when we look at, just the physical hazard of, I acutely had my arm chopped off, that's going to be pretty tough to repair, but we might be able to get some repairs to it. But we look at toxicity. If I end up going into a carbon monoxide charged environment, 500, 600, 1,000 parts per million of CO, get them out in the fresh air. Give them some high flow O2. We may even go so extreme and send them to a hyperbaric chamber. But for the most part, we're going to be able to flush out that carbon monoxide and take care of that. Same with hydrogen cyanide as well. We will at least be able to flush it out because the half-life of hydrogen cyanide is rather short. Once again, it does not have a lot of persistence. And once again, that's our toxic twins. We're going to see hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide on all of our structure fires, on any structure fire, on any dumpster fire, on any car fire, on any fire that you go on. Assume and know that there's carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide present. That's why at my agency, when I ended up outfitting our air monitors, we put all the traditional 4 gases out there: oxygen, LEL, carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide. But we added a 5th gas, which was hydrogen cyanide. So now we can identify what's going on. So short-term effects, not to be confused with chronic toxicity, which we all are aware of, we all understand. When I take a look at chronic toxicity, I'm taking a look at the big C, cancer, right? And it's not just cancer. It can be other things as well. So let's take a look at the other things. I was at a conference last year in Eastern Washington on prevention. So community risk reduction, they sat there and they talked about it. And, I'm a hazmat geek, so I know about carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide hazards. We're going to talk about that and just think about that tonight. But they were talking about this female at a house. I wish I got to find the video for this. She was living in a house and she started contracting and coming down with MS. She had to walk around with a walker. She was lethargic all the time. She had the jitters, like multiple sclerosis, everything else like that. And then the family ended up going on a vacation. I think it was like to Florida or Texas or something like that. And it was a long vacation. It was like a week and a half, 2 week long, like spring break. outstanding long vacation. And lo and behold, 4, 5, 6 days later, she finally was able to ditch the walker and ditch the cane, and the shakes slowly started to go away. And she was recovering. So they were thinking maybe it's because of the sunlight, maybe it's because of this. Who knows? We don't know, right? We're trying to figure this out. And then she gets back home, and the symptoms came on back, and they started persisting. And she's back wheelchair bound and everything else like that. It's like, okay, honey, I guess we got to move on down to Texas and figure this out. So what occurred is, I think they called the fire department. And the fire department rolls on in, just like my agency. They had a carbon monoxide detector on their EMS gear bag, and that thing started going into alert, like not really high. There was like 25 parts per million. It wasn't even chirping, but one of the responders looked on down, was like, "Whoa, you got a low level of carbon monoxide here in your house. Let's go take a look at it." And they ended up doing, because they were taking care of her EMS wise, they transport her, and they start taking a look at the house. They found a pinhole leak in the water heater vent that was pumping in low levels of carbon monoxide for the past 6 years. And because the rest of the family goes out to school, the father goes out to work, and she's the stay-at-home mom that takes care of everything, she ended up contracting that chronic health issue from carbon monoxide poisoning. And unfortunately, because it's chronic, more than 14 days, like we talked about, she was able to regain most of her balance. The jitters mostly went away, but time lost is brain loss. She lost a lot of mobility, and that's not repairable. It's unfortunately not repairable. And then for us, when we sit there and take a look at it in the fire service and EMS service and first responders, the chronic effect is those multiple fires that we go on. All those times that we didn't take a shower right after we got out of the fire, all those times that we never washed our bunker gear, and those carcinogens being on my skin, absorbing into my skin, inhaling them, we need to make sure we log our exposures. Guys, N4s, the app, NFORS, the app, is a great reporting tool. Up in the Northwest, for any of my union folks, PIERS.org, PIIERS.org is an amazing exposure reporting app that truly helps us out to help us for presumptive illness injury protection. I know that not all states have that right now. I'm going to speak at least specifically for my state, Washington. We have stepped forward, and I know there's many states across the United States and across the world, because of course we do have international listeners here that do have this. So check out PIERS or check out N4s. And even if you do not have presumptive illness injury protection right now, track your exposures. Track your exposures. I still have to do a recording for a structure fire that I investigated last Thursday, and I made sure to wear my PPE and go through that. All right, our routes of entry. We have 4 routes of entry. Our most common of them is inhalation. You breathe it in. And I'm going to grab my tools here as I'm talking right now. Let's see if I can find them and hopefully not have to look on down as we go through this. We have inhalation, ingestion, absorption, and injection. The 3 main ones that I care about are inhalation, ingestion, and absorption. Well, hopefully on the fire ground or on the EMS scene, you're not sitting there eating people's snacks and little goodies. But of course, when we end up doing rehab at the structure fire, we are grabbing the jumbo jacks or the pizza or the tacos or whatever the chief brings on in for us. We are getting rehab. So ingestion can absolutely be a threat and an issue during our structure fires and other items like that. It also could be during EMS calls if you end up getting contamination and you do not properly decontaminate. Alan, really quickly, we're using Draeger XAM 5000s. My Hazmat team runs MSA Altair 5s, and we're transferring on over to Blackline GC7, G7Cs. So absolutely check out some other stuff as we go through this. But inhalation is the fastest route of entry, breathing it in, of course, ingestion, and then absorption through my skin. When you sit there and take a look, go back half a second. We talked about the toxic twins, carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide. When you go to the NIOSH Pocket Guide, which is the industrial book that tells me all the physical properties, the PPE protections, and the threats for these chemicals, when I look at HCN, which is hydrogen cyanide, the #1 list of route of entry is inhalation. Number 2, right after that, is absorption. So when you're in a structure fire with your SCBA on, Yes, you're being protected from the inhalation of hydrogen cyanide. However, the absorption onto your skin, you're not being protected. And then your skin starts getting sweaty and you start absorbing hydrogen cyanide into your body. And it starts inhibiting your cell's ability to use the available oxygen in the environment. So we have to be really cautious with this. That's one of those reasons why we got to shower after we get out of the fire. That's why we should be getting and working on 2 sets of bunker gear. I know it's expensive, but it's important to do this. Yes, and it's also for the carcinogens. Injection is not just, taking an IV prick or something like that. It's if I get a cut or a tear on my skin, if I'm on an auto accident or other things like that, we can end up getting injection just from rubbing up on something and getting a tear in our skin or other items like that, right? Let's take a look here. So the toxic effects. So we have local effects and we have systemic effects. Absolutely, Nick. I'll work on I'll try to get a link for N4s and peers.org if I have time when we get done with this. So the local effect is if we end up having something burn my hand. And the best way when I explain it is things like sulfuric acid. Corrosives are the second most common usage class of hazardous materials out there, right behind gasoline, because I'm guessing everybody that's watching tonight has some gasoline. Got any spare hazmat? That is the most common hazmat out there. But sulfuric acid is number 2, or corrosives are number 2. Think about the batteries in most of our cars, not the lithium ion batteries. We're talking about lead acid batteries to start the car. And then acids are also used a lot in industrial fashions. Most of my acids, if I get an acid on my skin or a base on my skin, it's going to cause a burn right there where the hazard is. However, the big capital F, hydrofluoric acid. We talked to a lot of responders about this. This is a weak acid, and it's an acid that is produced in a lot of car fires from internal combustion engines as well as lithium ion batteries. They've been talking over the last few years about the lithium ion hazards from EVs and other things like that, and the HF, hydrogen fluoride, that is released. Absolutely loud, huge amount, but internal combustion engines have just as much HF coming from them. So we're figuring out that it's most likely the insulation, the electronics, other items like that. If I get HF onto my skin in a concentrated fashion, even though it's a weak acid, it's not going to burn and hurt immediately. It's going to bug me. It's going to bug me. Sulfuric acid, that is going to cause instantaneous harm, pain, burning, and damage. HF, hydrofluoric acid, it's going to cause a little bit of pain, a little bit of burning, but it's going to soak into my skin. And then it's going to start bonding and reacting with the calcium in my body. That's correct. You're going to be more prone for osteoporosis. No, that's not the biggest thing that I care about. The osteoporosis and the bone weakening, yeah, that's going to be an issue. But more importantly, I have to make this thing keep ticking. No, not my logo, but what's behind it. My thumper, my heart. And the way the heart works is we end up having the calcium channels and the sodium potassium imbalance of the electrolytes. That's what makes it work. So the first thing that happens with that, absolutely, Jason, we need topical calcium gluconate onto the skin. We need to start having that HF attack something else other than in here. So we have to watch out for it. Hydrofluoric acid, HF, is normally a gas, and it has an IDLH of 30 parts per million. Remember when I talked about hydrogen cyanide, that had an IDLH of 50 parts per million. So we're talking about some pretty low numbers here. So that's one that's going to cause a systemic effect. I get a burn right here, and it's going to cause something that harms me here. And we're going to see there's a lot of toxicants that cause that, right? There's that local effect. Here's a perfect gruesome, gory example as we take a look right there of chlorine exposure for somebody. So this person ended up getting chlorine in their eyes and it started clouding things over. Our specific area is going to be affected. Here, let's get that grossness off the screen and go to that systemic effect. So we've absorbed, and now we're affecting either the blood, the nervous system, different organs, target organs. Like benzene is a perfect example of one of these toxins and toxicants. Benzene's in gasoline. You inhale it, and it's going to start attaching and attacking the liver and the kidneys. And we're going to start seeing those issues for cancers in those organs. So we do have specific toxicants that will attack specific organs, and that's going to be from that systemic effect. We're not going to physically notice it for a while. And this is where we start getting to that chronic effect, right? We start hitting that that critical body burden, right? A perfect example for this is, and this is, keep on reading the slide. I'm not going to talk about this. I'll talk about the slide here in a little bit. And, but I'll talk about an EMS call that I went on a few years ago. It was a female, 22-year-old female complaining of respiratory distress. And this is like this is well before COVID, like 2016 or something like that, 2015. And she had upper respiratory distress, and she had a raspy, nasty cough. She felt miserable. Her eyes were bloodshot. She could barely even talk. She was miserable. You could tell that she was miserable. And then you look at her boyfriend, and he's perfectly fine. It's like, yeah, we went to sleep. We woke up, and I feel like absolute dog crap. Like, what the heck's going on? Dude, her boyfriend, who's the same age, a little bit bigger, obviously, because he's a male, he's not experiencing a single symptom at all. It's like, okay, are we going to transport her, take her to the hospital? Like, I'm not. Your vitals are not out of whack. You seem kind of sickly, but it was a rapid onset. She went to sleep feeling fine. She woke up feeling miserable. We start taking a look around the house, and I see a candle still lit. There's a candle over on the coffee table. It's like, And then I see the Camel, the Camel non-filters or the Marlboro Reds, whatever brand of cigarette that he wanted. They're right there. I'm like, I do a little bit of math on that. I'm like, sir, are you a smoker? Yeah. Ma'am, are you a smoker? No. How long has that candle been lit? Oh yeah, we lit it last night right before we went to bed. He has paralyzed all of his respiratory tract from all of his continuous smoking, and he's used to the particulates. She had not paralyzed any of it, and she was facing severe issues and symptoms from this. Her critical body burden, just from the off-gassing of a single candle overnight, her critical body burden was much lower than his. You would have had to put a lot more smoke in the environment for him to have any ill effects. And you start taking a look at this with these systemic events when we take a look at mercury or lead. And we're seeing this right now. My agency, I worked on, we end up doing heavy metal blood draws for our fire department. So all of our hazmat technicians, we end up doing a heavy metal blood draw every year to see if we're getting close to that critical body burden. And we did identify for a while, a few of our firefighters had high levels of antimony, which is a heavy metal. And I'm not talking about heavy metal like KISS or Iron Maiden or anything like that. We're talking about mercury, arsenic, lead, things like that. And we found out that antimony, we worked with the University of Washington to do some research studies on it. And we found out that this wasn't coming from hazmat calls. It was coming from our bunker gear. It was responders that either A, were working with our bunker gear inherently to hand out and pass out and clean bunker gear, or it was with members that ended up getting a lot of jobs. We're going a lot of structure fires, so they're wearing the bunker gear much more often. Luckily, antimony is not an unbelievably toxic material. It was just on the heavy metal blood panel list for us to pull. But if it would have been mercury or cobalt or another item like that, it can absolutely be a higher level. But we all know, and I've probably heard, that there's been a lot of conversations about the PFAS or the PFOS, 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 PFOAs, everything else. No relation to me, the Pfaff, but we're seeing that in our bunker gear. And now we can correlate in the back end that this person has a high level of antimony. There's a high possibility they ended up getting a high level of PFOAs from bunker gear contamination. So we can do the carrot and the egg thing. One of the other items right now that we're looking at into the EV world, into the lithium ion battery world, is we are exceeding this critical body burden for nickel oxide metals as well as cobalt oxide metals. So absolutely 100% every single time, guys, on any fire that you suspect a lithium ion element, wear your SCBA. Wear your SCBA. You need to. I already have many uncorroborated stories from members in Canada, in the United States, and in Australia that they have line of duty, career-ending injuries from going to one fire without their respiratory protection on, going to an EV fire, going to an energy storage system fire, going to a warehouse fire, and they are facing severe long-term effects, and they're done with the job. These are 30-year-old firefighters, 5 years on the job, 10 years on the job. One hit of some of this stuff, and you could be off the line with that inhalation hazard because you exceeded that critical body burden. So there's the names right there for our toxins. Looking at our toxicology, hepatotoxins, hepatitis affects the liver, nephrotoxins for the kidneys. Neurotoxins are convulsants. They're affecting the nervous systems. Hemotoxins, the blood. I don't need to go over every single one right there. I'll just jump on over. Teratogens affect the embryo and fetus. And one of the examples I talk about with teratogens, we may remember back when the Olympics went on down to South America, to Brazil, and they were very worried about the Zika virus. The Zika virus typically it causes flu and cold symptoms. However, during the years that it was the Olympics were down there, it ended up affecting the embryo or the fetus, and babies were being born with deformed and shrunken brains and heads, unfortunately. And that's one example of a viral version of this hazard as we take a look at that. Dose equals concentration times time. This 100% goes right back to that story that I talked about with the male and the female, the smoker and the candle. They both had the same dose. They had the same concentration and time, body mass, and then extraneous factors affected that. And this is where we look at acute versus chronic hazard. The longer and longer we're in it, we were talking about that just a second ago, that our industrial responders and workers, they're going to become nose blind to some of those chemicals out there. They have a much longer time for a low concentration. Really quickly into the hazmat field, when I look at my air monitors and I look at those other numbers out there, I'm looking at an 8-hour period, 40 hours a day. That is my first alarm for most of my air monitors. That is a permissible exposure limit. It's a pretty low number compared to an IDLH, immediately dangerous to life and health value. But when we take a look at the public, we have to protect the public, they're going under the ACGIH, and we're looking at emergency planning action levels. And these levels are even much lower because we're looking at somebody that's going to be in an environment for 24 hours at a time. We have the potentiating or the synergistic effect, alcohol and chlorinated solvents. Some people might say alcohol and Red Bull. I mean, the toxic twins are a perfect example of that. Carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide, they feed off each other. And going back to the question about the air monitors that Alan was talking about, right now with my Draeger XAM 5000, because I have hydrogen cyanide in my device and I have carbon monoxide, I was able to hit a tab for toxic twins. So now my specific air monitor is identifying that there's the potentiating or the synergistic effect of these two chemicals on a fire. So the first alarm for carbon monoxide is 35 parts per million. The first alarm for my hydrogen cyanide is 4.7 parts per million. Until those gases get to that level, my alarm doesn't go beep, 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 beep. However, because of this potentiating effect, because of the synergistic effect of CO and hydrogen cyanide, I might be at a level of like 3 parts per million hydrogen cyanide below the alarm level. I might be at 28 parts per million of carbon monoxide below that alarm level. But because it knows that they are synergistic, it will send my monitor into alarm. It gives me that clue for this potentiating effect. Really cool trick. I'm not saying that Draeger is the only one that does that either. So really quickly, we're taking a look at radiation on the toxicology. We have our four types of radiation: alpha, beta, gamma, neutron. I pretty much can focus on the alpha, beta, and gamma. And when we look at toxicology, what I care about to protect myself is alpha and beta. Alpha gets stopped by that dead skin. Beta can get stopped by bunker gear, but you don't want it in your body. That route of entry of inhalation is what's going to affect me on radiation. Think about a radiation event, a radiological dispersal device, a dirty bomb, other things like that, as a glitter bomb on steroids. For anybody in here that has kids, you probably know what I'm talking about. That glitter, when it falls in your car, you're never getting it out. And that's what happens with radiation. We've had events where we have that alpha emitter going out. So I don't want to breathe this in. So I'm going to need my APR filter. And here we go. That's the beginning of my cartridges and my protection. We have a P100 filter right here. Let's take a look if I can get it close enough to zoom. The MSA fuzzy P100 right there. So this is just an air filter that filters out my dusts is what we're looking at. We're trying to filter out my dusts. But the biggest way I protect myself is as low as reasonably achievable. Time distance shielding. We try to reduce the amount that we are in that radioactive element. We have to do monitoring to quantify the environment. Getting back into that acronym of tracing, we talked about the R right there. Now we're on to the A, asphyxiation, carbon monoxide, part of the toxic twins. Ideal H of 1,200 parts per million. That's low, not as low as hydrogen cyanide or hydrogen fluoride or other of those things, but what it does, it inhibits the blood's ability to hold oxygen, right? And I know some of our medics right now are probably spouting off. It binds to the hemoglobin at 240 times that of oxygen. Yeah, okay, numbers. It keeps your oxygen from getting into your blood. So that's how it poisons you. You still have 20.9% oxygen in the environment, but the carbon monoxide is more attracted to my red blood cells. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, which is still a very significant simple asphyxiant, it has killed people and it still continues to harm people to this day. It has an IDLH, immediately dangerous to life and health, of 40,000 parts per million. That's 4% in our atmosphere. It pushes out that oxygen. The C in tracum stands for corrosives and chemicals. Corrosives destroy or burn our tissue. We already talked about that with sulfuric acid. Like I said, as well, it's the largest use class after our flammables. It is going to cause a toxic hazard. You need chemical protective clothing, or you know what? Let's go back to that slide right there. As low as reasonably achievable. Don't touch the corrosives is my recommendation. Or in most of my hazmat classes, don't lick it, right? Corrosives are bad. And of course, they produce vapors as well. You're going to need to filter out the corrosive vapors. The other C for chemistry, chemicals, those asphyxiants. We have irritants, convulsants, like my nerve agents, carcinogens and allergens and sensitizers. We've probably gone on and seen the irritants. We know that they're not fatal, they're not deadly, but they do cause serious discomfort. The only thing that's going to fix this is time, not water, not milk, time. Absolutely. When I get pepper sprayed, I tell you what, I want to put freaking water on my face. I want to get the pain off. I will use it, but it's not going to help it. Time is the only thing that's going to help. Make sure that the people do not rub themselves. When you notice it, when you sit there and take a look at it in an irritant effect, a dispersal device with irritants, you're going to have upper respiratory distress. Hypothetical situation with a hypothetical Marine back in 2003 at the gas chamber and his last time before he got out of the Marine Corps. He decided in the name of science for this class to take off his M40 gas mask and take the biggest, deepest, most painful breath in. And my lungs kind of burnt. I mean, the hypothetical jarhead's lungs kind of burnt, but not really. It was a waterfall from up here, from the pharynx above, the mucous membranes, the mouth, everything else like that. Serious pain, serious waterworks with everything getting opened up, but the lung sounds were perfectly clear. This in comparison to a chemical release of corrosives or corrosive gases like chlorine or ammonia, you're going to start hearing deep-seated lung sounds. It's going to present, a chemical warfare agent is going to present the same as an irritant. However, when you start actually examining the patient, you're going to recognize very quickly that the beyond the initial symptoms, they are very, very different. Back to those nerve agents, those convulsants, whether it be a VX gas or a fourth-gen Novichok agent, we can just take a look at our pesticides. Pesticides, to kill insects, we're using organophosphate, which is a weakened version of a nerve agent. That is correct. We are gassing the insects when we kill them. We are sending them to the gas chamber. Therefore, this stuff, remember, dose equals concentration times time. So one of the biggest hazards is children, right? If a kid gets into some pesticides, when we look at that concentration, it's much more for them because their mass is much smaller. And an unfortunate event of this occurred in Texas about 6-7 years ago. A family of 5, the father ended up putting a pesticide outside. It was not a nerve agent, by the way, but he put a pesticide outside and the children were all sleeping in the basement. The product was water reactive. It created phosphine gas. That phosphine gas, heavier than air, went on down into the basement and killed not all 5 of them. I think it was 4 of the children they killed. Unfortunately, it was an industrial pesticide. So we have to be aware of these pesticides and the hazard that come with them. We talked a lot about carcinogens and the chronic hazard that it provides. Wash your gear, log your exposures, N4s and peers, guys, N4s and peers. Wash your gear, log your exposures, take your showers. We can also take a look at the allergens and the sensitizers. We probably know it for any of us that have gone on EMS calls. What's your date of birth? Oh, okay. What kind of medications do you have? Oh, we got this medication, this medication, this medication, this medication, this. Oh, you get the whole tray. Thank you for the tray. Okay. Are you allergic to anything? Oh, okay. Sulfa drugs. What other drug? Okay, you're this. Okay, that. Okay. Well, this person's probably been in the system for a very, very long time, right? We noticed that for a long time that there were a lot of people that were allergic to latex because of how many times they had been contacting latex. They had become sensitized and they have now become allergic. Some of our chemicals and some of our products, after one exposure, you're now sensitized to that product. Most of them, it takes multiple actions. But we had a pretty serious hazmat fire about 2.5, 3 years ago, where the product was so dangerous that a certain population could become sensitized after one contact with this product. And they even had the conversation, like industrial workers that have adult onset asthma cannot work there because it triggers asthma attacks. And one of the engineers on the first fire engine, he ended up touching his face with his contaminated hand because it was just so sticky, nasty stuff. And he broke out in a massive rash. So now he's sensitized for the rest of his life to this product, unfortunately, after one single exposure. Really quickly on the structure fires, I keep on dancing around and talking about structure fires. Here's where the science comes on in, guys. When you're sitting in there and you're in that fire, you're down there in that hallway and you're watching that smoke roll over your head, and it's so awesome. And all of a sudden the licks of fire going over, you're like, yes, this is the job town, boys, we're on it. And then, like a wise person, you finally open up the nozzle and you paint the walls and the ceiling to actually cool the environment so you don't get fire behind you in your path of egress. What's going on there? Well, that's rollover. That's unburned particulates and combustibles. And it's the carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide and acrolein and benzene and phosgene that's in the smoke. And when you do the math and I take a look at it, carbon monoxide has an IDLH of 1,200 parts per million. It's very toxic. Same with hydrogen cyanide, 50 parts per million, even more toxic twins. Well, the flammable range of carbon monoxide is 12.5% to 74. And likewise, you see the numbers for hydrogen cyanide. When I take a look at this, 1% in the atmosphere equals 10,000 parts per million. So if I have 1% of something, that's 10,000 parts per million. That rollover that you see in the overhead of the environment of the fire that you're in, those licks of flame, that is hydrogen cyanide and carbon monoxide lighting off. 56,000 parts per million for hydrogen cyanide, 125,000 parts per million for carbon monoxide. That's at a minimum. That's at a minimum. That's not even perfect combustion. So it's probably much higher than that when we take a look at this. So when we look at it for toxicity for us, you are in an absolutely unbelievable toxic environment right now. Levels of hydrogen cyanide above 270 parts per million can be fatal within 6 to 8 minutes. That's from the Fire Smoke Coalition when we take a look at this. So here's, guys, I love getting in there and going in and trying to make the save. Absolutely. But we've probably always heard the term risk a lot to save a lot. What is a lot? Well, a life's a lot. Outstanding. One of my co-instructors, he puts up this whole awesome thought process. And I'll be pretty quick right now. We're getting close to the end right now. But he takes the revolver. Okay, he doesn't actually do this in the class, but he's like, we're going to take the simulated revolver. We're playing roulette right now. And we put 6 bullets in the chamber. We spin it. It's like, if you don't pull the trigger, put the gun to your head and pull the trigger, that person dies. Is anybody going to pull that trigger? No, because that's not risking a lot to save a lot. I'm not sacrificing my life for another life. We may say that, and that looks awesome on the t-shirt, but we don't do that. We do this in a calculated fashion. So let's drop it on down. Let's say I got 3 bullets now in the chamber and I spin it, Russian roulette. This person dies if you don't put it to your head and pull trigger. What, nobody? You don't want to pull the trigger? Well, no, it's pointless. Let's take it always down to a 1 in 6 chance. Still, we're not going to pull the trigger because that's not a calculated risk. Risk a lot to save a lot means we need to first quantify what a lot is. It is a life that is savable. Here's the toxicity part right here with this slide. It is a life that's savable. If I have a room that is absolutely 100% charged, floor to ceiling with thick black smoke, and I have a little bit of rollover going into that, the room already is at about 200-300 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's getting close to potentially getting into that flashover condition, 1400, 1600, 1800 degrees Fahrenheit, untenable for anybody, even firefighters. But before it goes into flashover, when it's just full, thick, nasty, dark smoke, and we have a little bit of flames coming on out the window, is there any potential for savable life inside there? You look at these numbers and you can quantify and say no. Even if a person's in there, and I'm not saying that I'm not going to go in and try to get the poll, but we've probably seen it. Think about your career as some of the senior firefighters that are in here. When you end up pulling that person out of that smoke-charged room, we get them in the back of the ambulance or the medic unit, we transport and slap the back of that medic unit and get it going down the road. And then they die at the hospital. Well, I don't know what happened. They were alive when we got them out of there. No, they were dead. You just didn't know it. Their body, their critical body burden had exceeded whatever they could take because they inhaled 30,000 parts per million of carbon monoxide, 30,000 parts per million of hydrogen cyanide. Their body was dead. It's just, we got it before it fully, completely died. And I'm not saying I don't want to get those people out, but do I want to put myself at unbelievable peril and risk and be a line of duty death for something like that? It just comes on down to making a thought, right? I'm not telling you tactically what to do and how to do it, but you take a look at those numbers, and that what it does, it helps us quantify when you take a look at temperatures and smoke charge. And of course, there's a lot of things that can help out. We have cyanide kits, cyano kits to help on things like that. And it's truly helping extensively on this. Really quickly on the toxicology, we have the etiological, this is looking at that trace mechanism again. The etiological materials like viruses, bacteria, rickettsias, biological toxins. The biggest one that we're seeing that we know about and we've lived through over the last 4 years is viruses, right? Viruses, we still see bacteria, and we do have to be aware of, this is the EMS realm. For this, PPE is going to be the rule of the game. Proper PPE, proper gloves, proper glasses. Make sure we don't get any of that transfer, and in proper decontamination. When you are on an EMS call and you get done, when you take off those gloves, when you remove those gloves properly, and then we take everything else off, that is a form of decontamination. And make sure we end up doing a proper form of decon and do not spread those contaminants from one person to another. All right, sending her home. We're about to land the plane, everybody. Illicit drugs. This has been a big thing going across the entire country. We're seeing overdoses left, right, up, down, all around. And I've been talking to my law enforcement partners. I work with, I teach the initial academy for a bunch of law enforcement academies up here. And this is the big conversation, is the opiates and the opioids. Opiates or natural, opioids are the synthetic version. Fentanyl is an opioid. Carfentanil is an opioid. Morphine is an opiate. They all react the same, and they end up affecting the neurotransmitters of our body. I'm not going to say that this San Diego sheriff was faking. Obviously, he looks like he is on death's doorstep here in this picture. But the big thing that comes on down to it is you need to understand how he potentially hurt himself. A lot of people talk about the potential that it was absorbed into his body. It's a solid, unless you get into a solution with like hand rub or anything else like that, it should not be getting into it. Most of the time, our DEA brethren, our law enforcement brethren, and even firefighters for that much, when we end up closing up the bag or we end up having that dusted environment, that dust gets inhaled into our body, and now the game is on. It's not that it absorbs. So how do you protect yourself? Respiratory protection. You use that filter, and you don't even need to use something as extensive as these things. An N95 mask properly fitted right off your fire engine or your medic unit will keep you safe. You just need respiratory protection for this. And if you're not disturbing the dust, you should not have problems. We have other issues right now with our illicit drugs. It's been traveling slowly across the country. We've seen it more on the East Coast. I've heard of a few over here in the Northwest. I know the Southwest is having, as well as the South, is trank, animal fertilizers. tranquilizers. Narcan doesn't help for this. So once again, we want to keep this stuff out of our body. For all of these different chemicals that we may see on our EMS events in illicit laboratories or people that are using illicit drugs, use your gloves, wear your glasses, and I would say have a mask ready and handy for them. You do not want this stuff into your body. At least for the opiates and opioids, we have Narcan, right? We understand that. We know that game very, very well. But for tranq, there is nothing right now that's on the market that's going to cure the issues. But once again, it's still a very high dosage that needs to get into somebody's body. So we shouldn't see many accidental exposures from us as responders. But we have many others as well. When we take a look at it, we can see on EMS calls, our car accidents, all these other items, we can have a whole wide array of illicit drugs that can come out there. BHO labs have been a big one. I'm not going to sit there and say that getting a contact high from a structure fire or another issue like that is going to be the end of the world. But take the firefighter out of service, give them some Funyuns, and just let them keep a good eye on them. Maybe turn on Adult Swim or something like that. I don't know. Let's wrap it up right now, talking about the batteries really quick. Like I said, here's a chart. This is an older chart, but it still provides a little bit of the information that we did have a large increase of hydrofluoric acid for our EVs, but we also had the same peak at the same temperatures and same times of our internal combustion engines. But look over on the other side right now, pretty much where my face is, right? I've got a lot of heavy metals. Antimony, arsenic, lead, cadmium, chromium, nickel. These are some very, very high levels that are coming from, these are all coming from our lithium ion fires and some of those huge issues. Like I said, we're finding firefighters that have burnt lungs from the HF, from the oxides of metal. We're finding firefighters that have cancerous liver and dangerous levels of metal buildup in the fatty tissues of the liver and the kidneys. This is after just one exposure. So we have to be very, very careful with these lithium ion fires. Right now, I'm working with UL and TEEX down in Texas. We're doing research on textiles and PPE contamination post electric vehicle fire. We're going to see how much contamination is in there. We're going to see if a normal extractor can actually get the oxides of metal off. And if it can't, if one of those really, really, really expensive, shiny new carbon dioxide solvent extractors can get it out. Hopefully we'll have good results, but I don't know yet right now. So wrapping everything up here, it's important to understand how the product comes out and gets you. That's going to tell us what PPE we need to have, how it hurts us. That's going to help us identify that critical body burden and what we need to do to protect ourselves with possible antidotes, what we do to protect ourselves like an APR, like chemical protective clothing, heck, like a gown or even bunker gear. And then, like we said, how to fix it. I'm not talking about that too much, but we did talk a little bit about either things like 2-PAM chloride or our auto injectors for our nerve agents, or Narcan for some of our other items. The biggest thing, guys, in the back of our ERG, we have poison control, 1-800-222-1222, or your local poison control absolutely will help out. And there we go. I want to thank, I did not do all this, guys. I learned this from other firefighters, other paramedics, other responders. I've done a lot of research, contacting members across the country for this stuff. There's my contact information, guys. Provident's been awesome enough to me for us to have these conversations. This video absolutely will be on YouTube, and I know Chief Man's going to talk about that. And I have more than enough resources out there on the Hazmat and Rescue webpage for lithium ion batteries, for continuing training events, partners of friends to include Provident here, free classes, not just from Hazmat and Rescue, but from across the nation, from online resources. So make sure to stay thirsty, stay out there and continue to train, and for log your exposures and be safe.
If Sam will let me turn my camera back on. There we go. I think that, wait a minute. Hey, Sam, let me turn my camera. Thank you. All right, so before we go down a rabbit hole, I don't see any questions. Let me double check the queue or the instant messaging. I think you took care of questions in the chat as we went through. A lot of positive comments as always. And we'll make sure that we get the links for those reporting systems you talked about, and we'll put it in the email we send out to everybody. So you'll have it in the email you get tomorrow. So I want to open the floor with a couple of things, Chris, and maybe not so much a question, but maybe statements. So let's talk about the hydrogen cyanide for a minute. I read and I've heard, I think our EMS community, our EMTs and paramedics that show up at our calls are aware of the hydrogen cyanide issue. I think part of the issue sometimes is that when they show up at the emergency room, the ER docs aren't as familiar with it as they ought to be. And what happens is the paramedic or the EMT ends up in an argument with an ER doc saying, hey, you need to check these guys from hydrogen cyanide, and the ER doc saying, get out of here, you're a paramedic, you don't know what you're talking about. So I in a roundabout way, I'm making a comment here. If you're an EMT or paramedic and you suspect the hydrogen cyanide, you may end up in an argument with an ER doc or an ER nurse. It's that simple. Anything to add, Chris?
I absolutely do, Chief. You say it perfectly. You got to be tactful with it, and we see that. I literally was talking to partners from Seattle Fire Department. Hydrogen cyanide is one of those ones. We ended up transporting 6 of our firefighters years ago for potential exposure, and the hospital was so slow to pull blood draws that once again the half-life had expired. And you guys have a clean bill of health. Well, yeah, you pulled our blood 2 hours after the fire. But referring back to the Seattle Fire Department members that I was talking about, I won't name them by name, but we ended up having a pretty serious radiological event up here in Washington about 5-6 years ago. And it was at the hospital. It was at the Cancer Research Center in the main hospital of Washington State to receive, per all the plans, to receive radiological emergencies was that hospital. They closed and locked the doors, and they said, no, you're not coming in. And it took a little bit of work between the firefighters finally getting a hold of one of the radiological techs who know what they're talking about. They were talking to a charge nurse, which nothing against them. They know, we know it. We say it on, if we have a patient come in covered in biological material head to toe, they're frustrated, but they let them come in. You say anything hazmat like hydrogen cyanide, radiation, hydrogen fluoride, they lock the doors and they do not let you in. So being tactful and finding the right person to talk to is critical. And
Marie Meyer makes an excellent comment. You have to build that bridge with the ER doctor before you need them to pull the blood draws. Reach out and make contacts before it happens. That's so true with so many things that we do. You know, don't wait till the problem presents itself. If we know the potential's there, let's do the legwork up front and avoid the confrontation, if at all possible, when we're in the midst of an emergency. Here's another comment: call the ER ahead of time, let them know what you're up to. So I want to go back to, you talked about the long-term effects. So, and you correct me if I'm wrong, most folks that are on a hazmat team get a lot of baseline physical stuff done ahead of time. So they kind of know what your blood levels are, so on and so forth. A lot of our hazmat teams may not see or may not even make a lot of hazardous materials responses in a year's time. On the other hand, we don't do the baseline stuff with firefighters who are being exposed to all kinds of environmental stuff on a regular basis. And I don't care whether you're career or volunteer. So the issue becomes there was no baseline there to begin with. So the point I'm trying to make is you need to make sure that your doctor, your primary care physician, especially if you're a volunteer, knows that you're involved in the fire service. And I will make sure that Sam puts a link in the material to take you to the physician's checklist that you can provide to your family doctor so they have an understanding of what those exposures are and what kind of additional testing they should consider for you. I just had to change my primary care physician because my other one retired. I sent her the checklist and she was like, I never knew this stuff. I never realized this. A year ago, I had to deal with a urologist, wasn't aware of the elevated risk of testicular cancer with firefighters. The bottom line is you have to advocate for yourself with your primary care doctors. Make sure that they understand you're involved in the fire service so they can do the additional blood work from year to year. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's early recognition and early diagnosis that saves lives.
100%.
Additional comments from you, Chris?
You hit it right down the head, Chief. And I was talking, I've got some good friends that I've met from some of the conferences, yourself included, but on the emergency, on the health side, Dr. Sarah Janke, she talks about mental health as well as physical health, and Crackle Magazine is a great health and wellness magazine that we all love and support throughout that. And both the information that you provide there, Chief, and other information, firefighting is different. And our doctors, our primary care physician, they don't know what they need to be testing for us. So right now, like with my agency, we end up doing LifeScan. And LifeScan was out at Fire Rescue International this year, and they're trying to push out things. And you need to make sure you have specific blood tests. Like Chief said, is you have to get that baseline and continue. And every year, I have on my phone in my important files, I have my 12 lead every year. I run a 12 lead every year. And of course I do the heavy metal blood draw. And I talked to one of my former fire chiefs that was my predecessor. Was like, okay, why are we doing this heavy metal blood draw? You just said there, Chief, I don't go on a lot of hazmat calls, especially around with the heavy metal. But he said that we're the canary in the coal mine. Because we're by law, we have to have a pre and post employment medical physical. By law, hazmat techs do. We have to have an annual physical. So we have that heavy metal blood draw. And we was able to identify that antimony hazard, which, okay, cool. We have 16 hazmat techs with just my department that were tested. You can guarantee if we would have, when we were looking at it, if we would have gotten more that had antimony exposures that were higher, we were going down the path of testing all of our firefighters. It's incumbent on you, and Chief is 100% right. I may be a career firefighter. It doesn't matter if you're career, if you're resident, if you're volunteer. The fire doesn't care. Your health and safety doesn't care. You need to be an advocate for yourself and work with your doctor to make sure that they're aware of the risks that you respond to in structure fires.
Right, and I don't want anybody to think I'm picking on the medical community. The issue is, the medical community, I mean, they don't know any more about a bricklayer than they do a firefighter. Okay, so unless you talk to your doctor and make your doctor aware of what you do, whether you're volunteer or career, they have no way of knowing. And my new primary care doctor was tickled to death that I shared that checklist with her. And she said, well, I'm going to hold on to this and start using this with other firefighters. Well, where I live in central Pennsylvania, we have no career firefighters. So unless that volunteer firefighter goes to their doctor and tells the doctor, hey, I'm also a firefighter and here are some exposures, they have no way of knowing they should do the additional testing. And here's another one that's been somewhat controversial. I got myself enrolled in the VA medical system. Primary care doctor at the VA would not order a low dose CT scan for my chest. I actually called the environmental health people at the VA, and after a 30-minute conversation with an environmental health doctor, when I explained to her I'd been in the Air Force as a firefighter and a volunteer, she ordered it for me. And the test lasted about, I think I was in the tube maybe 45 seconds to a minute. Lo and behold, they find a nodule in my thyroid. Now, so far, all the testing has come back, everything's benign. But in another 6 to 8 weeks, I'm going back for another long needle aspiration biopsy of the nodule. The bottom line is, had I not pushed with an environmental health nurse or doctor to get the test for me, it wouldn't have been done. And my understanding is that more and more insurance companies are allowing for the low dose CT chest scan, especially if you were a smoker and you've been involved in the fire service.
It's huge. You have to be that advocate, like you said, Chief. And it isn't to knock them. It's important to speak up when you're in that doctor's office and talk to those doctors and get that annual physical and advocate for yourself, because you're the only one.
And one last point I want to make, and that is the cancer registry. I just heard the numbers a couple of weeks ago, and okay, I'm going to give the fire service on here hell right now, okay? The number of people that have registered under the National Cancer Registry compared to the number of firefighters in our country is absolutely pathetic at this point. And I'll make sure Sam has a link in the email that's coming out to take you to that cancer registry. And they're not asking you health questions, folks. They're asking you about your career in the fire service. Where have you been a firefighter, volunteer career? Were you an instructor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So if you want to help the cause going forward, to help the fire service deal more with cancer presumption, get yourself registered in the cancer registry, okay? If you're like me, where you've been a volunteer in numerous states and different positions in the military as a firefighter, it may take you a little longer. It's free, folks, and they're not asking you medical questions. Get registered. Enough of the editorial. I feel
remiss. I feel bad that I forgot to add that, Chief. I was just advocating for our academy. I'm working with our academy that the next academy coming up, they're going to spend the time to do it. For the junior members in there, it's probably going to take you 20 minutes, 15 minutes to do it in. I ended up signing up for it. God, what was it? I think December. I signed up on Christmas last year, I think. And it took me a few hours, because I got a lot of departments under my belt. I got a lot of calls and events under my belt. It took the more senior folks, especially the ones that may have a little more difficulty typing on computers, give yourself some time. Junior firefighters, it's absolutely incumbent on you to do this. And here's the biggest thing with it. And Rick Malarkey is a great advocate for it. This gets the information to NIOSH, and it helps that research. NIOSH does the line of duty death reports, the unfortunate part of our job, and they end up doing the after actions and this tracking of firefighters that contract cancer, firefighters that get injured, firefighters that die. They're going to be able to go to the beginning and say, okay, where did this path go? And what that's going to help is changing the fire code, changing the PPE standards, changing our tactical standards to give ourselves a safer environment that's more effective, not to keep us from fighting fires, to let us be able to do our job more safely and more effectively.
Absolutely. So to Professor Clyde H. Phillip, we will make sure that Chris gets your contact information. Chris, you may end up in the Caribbean, in South America, doing some programs. So with that, I think we've answered all the questions. Here's Canada. They want you in Canada. So I think we've answered all the questions. Chris, again, based on the comments we got just in the chat, you know, the program, extremely informative. Again, it always is. You're always enthusiastic about what you do. There's no doubt in my mind within the first quarter, the first couple of months of 2024, you'll be doing another webinar for us. You know, again, thanks very much. To our audience, please visit www.hazmatandrescue.com if you want more information about the training Chris has to offer and some of the free stuff that he's already got available out there. If you have any questions or need additional resources from today or have an idea for a future webinar, please email us at info@providentins.com. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. Now, listen, folks, I'm on the road. I won't get back into Pennsylvania till after 11 o'clock on Wednesday night. So it may be Thursday or Friday before you get your certificates. While I'm on this topic of certificates, when you register, if you put a bogus name on the registration, when I get the spreadsheet to generate the certificates, you're going to get a certificate with your bogus name on the certificate. Then you're going to email me and tell me I have your name wrong. We can only use what you give us for your names. I want to remind everybody there'll be a short survey after this evening. Please take the time to complete it. Not only does it give Sam and I, our marketing director, a lot of good, valuable information, but we share it with our management team so they know what we're up to, and so we can get their support to continue with these webinars. Keep an eye open for your email. It'll have your certificate of attendance attached for tonight's webinar. Again, tonight's episode will be uploaded to the Provident YouTube page. That link will be in the email you get tomorrow. And again, this wraps up another Provident webinar. On November the 21st at 7 p.m., we're going to be hosting Dr. Richard Gassaway for a webinar on how smart responders use situational awareness to improve safety. Until then, stay safe for your family's sake. Thank you and good night.